Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Eric Ristow, and he is the VP of Global Technology Services at Lineage. And Lineage is the largest cold chain provider out there. I recently got a chance to tour their New Jersey facilities, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen some of the stuff I posted about that. But we're going to dive into more about their business, more about, of course, the warehousing side of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about technology and how they approach innovation, how they approach technology. And we're going to touch a little bit too, because they do some acquisitions here and there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens on the technology front when you're trying to combine two different businesses, different operations, and things of that nature. So very interested in diving into this with Eric today. So Eric, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing great. My pleasure to be here, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely happy to get you on here, and definitely happy to talk about this. I think it's an interesting topic, and you guys are so large, so I'm very interested to hear how you approach technology in general. But before we kind of dive into all of that, I gave my little summary of what Lineage is, but you probably could do a little better. So why don't you kind of give us your brief overview of Lineage and what it is that you all do?
You actually did a really good job. We're the world's largest temperature controlled logistics provider. We basically store and transport food for all of your big packaged consumer packaged goods customers. So food logistics providers, food producers, food manufacturers, you name it, you eat it, we store it. And that's basically what we do. We have almost 500 warehouses now in 20 different countries, and we move roughly 250 billion pounds of food through our network a year.
250 billion pounds of food. Wow,
If
that's
you've eaten in the last week, it's probably come
yeah.
through our one of our facilities.
Wow, wow. Well, I have eaten in the last week, so odds are good there. So very interesting there. And now your role is the VP of Global Technology Services. So what does that mean? What do you actually do and focus on?
Yeah, I mean it's a wide range of responsibilities. It's everything from your traditional IT services when you think about
Hmm.
networking and uptime and end user services to things like how do we integrate different applications that we have? How do we grow our business? How do we do so in a cost effective manner? How do we assimilate new technologies that are out there? Whether it's the AI stuff, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but also how do we take very fractured and fragmented part of our supply chain and stitch it all together so that we all know where our product is, where it's moving to, and how do we provide the best service ultimately to our customers so they can get their food into people's mouths.
Interesting, interesting, and obviously a lot going on there, right? Because you have, as you mentioned, you have like 500 different warehouses about in multiple different countries, right? So multiple different languages involved, I'm sure, and different customs and things of that nature. So, and to add on top of that, temperature control, which adds another layer of complexity too. So a lot going on, and I imagine a lot of focus on trying to find technologies that can help support those things and make sure that you can deliver on the critical things that you need to, because food is certainly a critical thing, right? I mean, I just ate a sandwich before we started this recording, so, and maybe some of it came through Lineage. I don't know. I had some cold cuts, so potentially. So tell us a little bit about Lineage's approach to kind of innovation, and how do you look at technology as a whole and kind of, I guess, look at what maybe is next from a technology perspective?
Yeah, it's all really underpinned by our vision. We want to be the
Mm,
world's most dynamic temperature controlled logistics provider. We want to eliminate waste and we want to help feed the world. And so our technology strategy is core to that mission, right? How do
mm,
we ensure that one, we're keeping things cold, that we can monitor when things are kept cold? How do we also ensure that we know how long something's been in our one of our freezers or one of our refrigerators, right? Ultimately, we want to make sure that our customers have the best opportunity to move that product along in the food supply chain. And a lot
mm,
of times they need our help to do so. So capturing data is fundamental to whom we are, and taking data from multiple disparate systems and normalizing it and getting it in the hands of the people that can make decisions in a timely manner is really critical. You talked about it with the complexity with the energy thing.
Right.
Um, Energy brings a completely new dimension to what we do from a warehousing perspective. If you There's a timeliness associated with everything here. If you're not immediately getting the things to the right temperature and keeping them cold, and then ultimately moving them out in a timely manner, um, you're going to run into problems. Our
Mm.
product can't stay on the dock. If a driver doesn't show up and you don't know where that driver is, you're going to have to touch that product again and put it back in the freezer or in the refrigerator, and that ultimately leads to additional touches, additional work, and ultimately inefficiencies. So how do we make sure that we know when the driver is showing up? How do we make sure that we have the right product and that it's sitting there for them to pick up and to move on to the next point in the supply chain? I mean, these things are really tough to manage, right? Ice
Mm.
cream sits at minus 20 degrees. If it gets much warmer than that, it's not appropriate for consumption, right? You don't like flaky ice crystals in your ice cream. I'm sure you've seen that happen. We pulled it in and out of
Yeah,
the
we don't
freezer
like that.
too
Yeah.
many times. Like the product quality deteriorates, and
Mm.
ultimately it's not marketable for our customers in that manner. And so we're really stewards of their product, and we have to maintain
Mm.
things to spec, and we also need to make sure that we're communicating that to them and building the trust with our customers so they know that we're taking care of their product as they would be taking care of their product.
Hmm. Very interesting, and I think that's such a great point there. Like, because you mentioned, if something's on the dock and you don't know where the driver is, doesn't show up, right? For like a regular ambient type of warehouse, right? I mean, that's like that's not such a big deal, right? Because you can keep it at whatever ambient temperature it is at the moment. It's not going to really have any effect on the product itself. But as you mentioned, is really impacting the integrity of that product, and then ultimately you guys, you are stewards, as you mentioned, to delivering on that customer experience that your customers are looking to deliver to their customers, right? So being very mindful of that and having to look at that, I think, it adds these additional complexities, as you said there. So how do you, I guess, when you look at technology and you look at kind of innovation in a sense in the warehousing space, and especially for Lineage, I mean, how do you what do you prioritize, right? Are you prioritizing the energy aspect like you're just talking about? Or are you prioritizing looking at labor augmentation, or prioritizing software systems? So what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. We try to look at
Everything.
all of it, right? Energy is our second biggest line item from an expense perspective. We spend a
Right.
lot of money on energy. So how do we not only become more energy independent, but also energy resilient, and then also energy efficient? So when I mention, hey, we're having to move product in and out from the dock, if the driver doesn't show up, that means we're opening basically the refrigerator door, right? And every
Mm.
time you open the refrigerator door, you're releasing that cold air, and you have to then chill that air again.
Hmm.
So there's a pretty substantial challenge when you think about the dynamics associated with that. It's also a lot harder to put in solar panels on these warehouses because of the permeable layers that you have and the structure that's associated with it, and the fact that you are keeping the area beneath those solar panels cold, and you need to prevent moisture and all that kind of stuff. So there's challenges associated with it throughout the process. I mean, but when
Mm.
you really look at it fundamentally and take a step back, our core differentiation is technology, right? It's really
Mm.
hard to take such a fragmented business and build efficiencies across the entire network that allows one of our customers to understand where their inventory, what their entire inventory position is with us. We're likely one of many providers for that customer, and we have grown through acquisition. And so for us to provide that single view and that single pane of glass and insight into what we're doing for them is absolutely critical, because it makes their day so much easier. How do we transfer information to them? How do we give
Mm.
them the data that they need in a timely manner to make the decisions? Because everything, when you're dealing with food, it's perishable ultimately, and anything that you're doing has a time sensitivity to it. So really, when we think about what's the underpinning of our business, a lot of it starts with data, right? And
Mm.
being able to ingest data from disparate technologies and standardize that data is something that we've been ultimately working on since I joined back in 2014. And back then it was all about big data, and everyone was saying about big data. Well,
Yeah.
big data is important, but it's also really important to have the right foundation and structure in place to manage it so that you can scale it accordingly. And all the decisions that we make come from our data assets. And whether
Mm.
that's an energy decision, whether that's a labor decision, or whether that's something else that drives a different initiative based off of what we're trying to do for our customers, it's a data driven decision. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with our technology.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you touched on that, like the data aspect, right? Because I mean, so many conversations that I have through the podcast and just from my prior experience too. I mean, it's such a key aspect. Like, as you said, though, you have this data and then you got to do something with it, right? Or like, what's the point
Mhm.
essentially, right? So it's very interesting to hear that. I imagine, with the balances between the temperature control and the sensitivity of some of the products you're dealing with. I mean, that data becomes even more critical, right? To understand, because you have, if you have a point of failure or something, or you want to know where that happened and how do you prevent that from happening again, right? And the data is going to help you to understand that. So I'm curious. I mean, do you have and so you've been with Lineage for a little while. You said since 2014. So is there a project around technology or something that stands out to you that was particularly exciting or interesting for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. I think the first one that stands out is, how do we enable our customers to have a better understanding of what we're doing for them and servicing their product? And that was our Lineage Link platform. Lineage Link is our
Mm.
customer experience platform. And as I noted, when we grew through acquisition, right? We've made over 100 acquisitions since I've been here alone. And
Mm.
so historically, a customer, a big consumer packaged good provider, or a food manufacturer would have to log into different portals just to understand what their inventory position is with us. So what we've done with through our data assets is build a pipeline into a single interface and a single UI for them to understand where their product is, how to place orders against it, how to schedule appointments for it, and ultimately how to get the data out of it so that they can make decisions or integrate it into their corresponding ERPs as well. So that is a really exciting one because
Mm.
now we have a consistent standard globally for how customers interact with us and the tools that they need to interact with us. And that's fundamentally changed the game for a lot of our customers, particularly mid-tier and smaller customers that don't have necessarily the technology assets to rely on themselves. This has provided a differentiation for them so they can see where their product is. Ultimately, they don't want their product to go to waste, right? And if we can give them a notification like, hey, your product has been sitting here with us for 60 days or 90 days or 120 days, whatever it might be, and you usually order this product, when it reaches a certain time threshold, we can provide them that proactive notification so they can make a decision on what to do with it and how to disposition it. Do I want to sell it to a primary market? Is there a secondary market or a different tier of customers that they want to go pursue? Or ultimately, sometimes it's not fit for human consumption anymore. Can I do something else with it besides send it to a landfill? And we help them
Mm.
find those opportunities, whether it's through our own Lineage Foundation for Good that they can donate that product to by simply transferring it in a warehouse, or finding a different local provider that they can ship that product to. Ultimately, if we allow a customer to send their product to a landfill, we've really done them a disservice because we're
Mm.
not being the right stewards of their product and enabling them to understand what's happening with their product. They've spent so much time and effort to get that product to our warehouse that anything beyond that is just is waste, right? And
Mm.
so that is really an opportunity. That connection that we build with our customers allows for a higher level of customer service and a higher standard when it comes to temperature controlled and food storage.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that because I mean, you're treating their product almost like it's your product in a sense, right? Like just as if it was yours, you want the best outcome to happen with it instead of just saying like, well, they're not paying
In a way,
attention
it
to
has
it.
to be,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
ultimately, we're consumers of that too. We eat French
yeah,
fries, we eat hot dogs, right? And
yeah.
if we're not we eat, the strawberries that are coming off the fields in Oxnard, California, right now that go into kids' Uncrustables and school lunches, right? And
Mm,
so, if we're not taking that mindset ourselves, that hey, this is something that we're going to consume, and we want to be prepared to eat as well, then we're not servicing the customer in a way that they should be serviced.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting too. You mentioned there, since just alone, since you've been there since 2014, right? So like 10, 11 years now, you guys have done 100 acquisitions, right? I mean, that's no small number, and that's no small feat to try and incorporate all these different operations in. And I imagine on the technology side, there's some definitely things that can become a little tricky there. So talk to us a little bit about that. Like, how do you? Because you mentioned the Lineage link, right? Which
Yeah.
I think I saw when I visited the New Jersey location here. But how do you acquire another warehousing company, cold chain warehousing company, and whether it's one facility, two facilities, however many facilities, you bring that into the Lineage fold. How does that work from like a technology perspective? How do you
Yeah.
integrate all that?
The M&A piece and the integration is absolutely right, really critical. And it starts with a due
Hmm.
diligence process. Do we know what systems they're currently using? Do we have familiarity with them? Do we know who's supporting them? How archaic are some of these systems? A lot of them can be running on really outdated technology, right?
Yeah.
We don't see necessarily the investment in technology that some companies make, that we would ultimately make. So bringing them onto our core technology stack is of paramount importance. Now, whether that's our financial and HR ERP, whether that's our domain systems, whether it's our email system, whether it's our refrigeration control systems, all of these things are really important because ultimately it provides a level of protection and safety as well when it comes to a cyber incident or a
Mm,
vulnerability that might exist in that part of the network. So we take it very seriously. The quicker that we can execute on some of these things, honestly, the better. And the core piece of that is really the warehouse management system. The warehouse management system is what really drives the functions and operations of a warehouse. It's more than just an inventory management system that says, "Hey, I started today with this much inventory. Here's all the puts and takes, and this is where we ended." It's really and oftentimes driving the tasking and activity of those individual operators in a warehouse.
mm,
So what's really important for us to understand is, what system are they on? How complex is that system? What are the nuances that they might have? It could be regional nuances. It could be regulatory nuances. There's different versions of the USDA out there,
yeah.
and there's different requirements from a reporting perspective. Those are often uh, functional elements that we need to then code and put into our technology stack. So what we've really done is we've taken the what I'll call the smorgasbord, the Baskin Robbins flavors, 31 flavors of WMS systems, and
Yeah.
try to narrow it down to 4 or 5 core WMS systems. And we'll, in the first year of acquisition, try to migrate those acquisitions onto that WMS system. And with
Okay.
that comes a whole host of cascading opportunities from a technology perspective. It lights up our labor management system. It lights up our data assets, and data then flows into our centralized data assets so we can begin reporting on it. It lights up things like Lineage Link. It lights up other things like very simple functional capabilities like a dock dashboard so that our
Mm,
operators can see when trucks have arrived, how long they've been there, how much has been loaded, are they at risk of missing their turn time? Because turn times are incredibly important from a service perspective to our customers. It's really no different than your arrivals, departures that you see at an airport, right?
right.
Um,
Mm,
and and then the WMS conversion really becomes the tip of the spear from a technology perspective. And the sooner that we can get them onto one of our core systems, the more understanding we have of what users have which access to it. Are we deprovisioning them? Are we making sure that everyone has the right level of access? but then it's also enabling a host of other technologies that we can implement as well.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting here to hear that you have, 4 or 5 different WMSs like going on in the ecosystem. But I mean, there's so many WMSs out there just available in the market, right? That I can imagine when you do these acquisitions, it's kind of like, oh, like, well, what's what's this one or what's this one, and how do we bring that in and kind of streamline it a little more, like you're talking about. So very interesting to hear about that. And so you're a technology guy. So we got to ask you this question. You mentioned a little bit in the beginning there the AI, and we talked about the data and things like that. But tell us a little bit about because people ask me a lot, like, what are people actually doing with AI in the warehouse? So tell us a little bit about, from Lineage's perspective, from your perspective, like, I mean, how are you viewing AI? Are you utilizing it? If so, how? And what does that look like from a implementation perspective?
Yeah, AI is not a new concept to us. Honestly, it's
Mm.
something that we've been trying to drive and build efficiencies around in our warehouses as honestly as long as I've been here.
Oh
And it
wow.
starts
Okay.
again with our data assets. The stronger
Mm-hmm.
that your data assets are, the more robust they are, the more reliable they are, the better decisions you can make, and the better tools you can build off of it. And a great example is, we have a world class data science team,
Mm-hmm.
and they have been building over the course of years a suite of algorithms that allows us to drive efficiencies in our warehouse. Now, whether that's on the energy side, we do a lot of what we'll call flywheeling from an energy perspective, where we will cool the warehouse down at night to very, very cool temperatures, and then during the day let it slowly
Mm.
rise up to still within tolerable levels, but we're going to avoid the the cost prohibitive times where people are using their AC when they're going at home, and we want to make sure our compressors are off during those peak periods, right?
Mm.
From that
Interesting.
4 to 7 window when everyone's coming home and turning on their AC and using all their electricity at home, that's when you see cost spike. So how can we
Mm.
make sure that we are not turning on compressors on that time and being more cost effective? Our data science team builds algorithms based off of that and our temperature sensors within our warehouse. Another great example is how do we really manage the tasking and workflow within our warehouse? When you think of things and what an operator does often, they're single-minded and single-threaded with whatever task they're doing. If they're unloading a truck, they are just unloading that truck. They're taking a
Mm.
pallet from the truck, putting it in the freezer, coming back, taking another pallet, putting it back in the freezer. There's a lot of wasted time in that process, right? There's a lot of empty forklift miles. I mean,
Mm.
if we were to ask your listeners, what percentage of time does a forklift or a material handling equipment um, run without carrying a product? I mean, they'd probably say like, oh, 40% or 30%. The
Mm.
true answer is 62% of the time.
Oh wow.
62% of the
More than
time,
half. Wow. Yeah.
MAG is moving in a warehouse without actually carrying any product. We need to eliminate that and minimize that as much as possible. So what we built a sequence of algorithms that allow us to coordinate and orchestrate what's going on in the warehouse. And we call this LinOS. It's Lineage's industrial operating system. And
Mm.
really what it does is it takes a step back and looks at all of the activities that need to happen at the warehouse during a period of time. And it provides and identifies that warehouse operator that can perform that task and do the next best task. So they have to obviously be trained on the equipment. They have to be trained on the task itself, and they have to know what's going on from a safety perspective. But we find they shouldn't be across the warehouse, right? They should ideally be someone that's cross trained closer to that activity. And then we can stack rank all these activities, and they can then be working on multiple different things concurrently so that one, we're still meeting our service times, but we're also more efficient with the people's time and ultimately their productivity. So going back to that single threadedness of unloading a truck
Mm.
from an inbound truck from a dock door, we'll sequence two trucks concurrently on the outbound side and coordinate them so that as we're unloading a truck, they're going into the freezer, moving over a couple rows or a bay or an aisle or whatever it is, and picking up some product and bringing it back out to the dock. Now, it's a very basic concept of
Interesting.
interleaving, but
Mm,
you start scaling that across all of the activities and you providing more directed and contextual understanding of what those tasks should be, you drive a lot more efficiencies and you're reducing your ultimately your overhead, the safety, the wear and tear on your material handling equipment, etc. Right. And
mm,
then ultimately your energy costs too, because you're going in and out of those freezers less, you're opening the refrigerator door less. And so you're releasing less cold air. So that's really one of the driving forces that we're looking at from a technology perspective and innovation perspective that we're currently delivering within our network. We've already cracked this nut on automated sites, so we've built a couple
mm.
automated sites that are leveraging this technology, and we're also now deploying it at a lot of our manual sites. Um, people ask me all the time, "Hey, why don't you just turn a manual site into an automated site?" It's really not that
Yeah.
practical,
I,
right?
I
There's
I was just
product
going to
in
ask you
it.
that.
You can't move the stuff out of it, right? You,
Yeah.
you can't retrofit a building. It's very
Mm,
cost prohibitive. But in a way, we are automating what's happening from an activity perspective because we're telling
mm,
that person precisely what they should be doing, where they should be loading that pallet on the truck, the orientation of the truck, of that pallet on the truck, so that we don't overload one of the axles, so we can fit more product onto it so it doesn't get sent back, and all those type of things. So it's that's all algorithmically driven and algorithmically based, and
mm.
the system learns from itself. And so those type of concepts aren't new to us. I think the rest of the marketplace is kind of catching on to what AI is capable of
Yeah.
from a data perspective. But this is something that's been part of our strategy since ever since I joined Lineage.
Mm. Very interesting there, and very interesting to hear kind of the strategy and the way to think about how to leverage it and utilize it. And so you touched on the automation there, and when I visited the two sites here in New Jersey, one was manual, one was automated. So talk to us a little bit about that, like because some people that I've talked to and that are in the cold space or in other spaces, it's there's some additional like complexity there, right? Because you're obviously in like sub-zero temperatures, right? Which is not always so conducive to mechanical things, right? So tell us a little bit about how do you make the decision that you're gonna automate a building versus not automated, and what are some of the challenges there due to the extreme temperature?
Yeah, there. I mean, there's a host of challenges when you're dealing with
Hmm.
freezing temperatures, right? And it's not just that the technology doesn't function as well in sub-zero temperatures. Humans don't
Yeah.
function as well in sub-zero temperatures
Yeah.
either.
Very true.
So
Right.
part of our goal is to limit the impact on them. How do we keep them out of the freezer, right? And so
Mm,
if they're going to pull product, we want to make sure they can locate that product, we know where it is, and they can get out of there. Anytime that you know we go send them to a location to pick something up and it's not there, and they have to wait in the freezer, is just we're deteriorating the employee experience there.
mm,
The decision to build automated or to drive automation, a lot of it's driven by profile, and by the customer that you're building it for. That's historically been the foundation for it. Typically, an automated warehouse is usually dedicated to a single customer or a core couple of customers, core anchor
mm,
customers, and they have similar product with similar profiles, with similar turns and similar handling needs. And that's what we've done at a couple of our warehouses, but we've also now moved to more of a generic automated type of warehouse that's more of a public refrigerated warehouse style, right? So,
okay.
how do we take on different SKUs? How do we train the systems to use different SKUs? How do we ensure that there's this, standardized packaging, and how do we ensure that things are wrapped appropriately so that they can go through our automation system and ultimately to our layer pickers as well? What we want to automate is as much as we can to improve the employee experience and reduce the impact to our employees. And
Mm,
so ensuring that we have a standard process here is really critical, and that we can make sure that product conforms to the specs that are needed for the automation. And that's sometimes really challenging to do. That being said, there's different ways to think about automation as well, right? And it can be conveyor movements, it can be It can be cranes. It can be all sorts of different things. What you saw in New Jersey
Mm-hmm.
at the Linden facility was how do we create better crane systems and remove the need for high reach operations in the storage rooms. And that's a very basic but yet very integral part of what we're trying to do. And then extending that to other areas, whether it's case picking, whether it's layer picking, whether it's reading barcodes, we're trying to automate all of that. And so there's a host of opportunities here when you start stitching these things together to drive more of a seamless warehousing process and keeping it humming.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear the thinking behind that and what goes into that because I mean, as you mentioned, I think like a freezer is like a perfect use case for automation, right? Because humans don't want to be in there, right? I think if you told a human like, "Hey, we're gonna, move you out of the freezer and automate it," that's like one area they would be like, "Oh yes, thank you," right? So I think it's very interesting to hear about what goes into that and the thinking behind that as well. So now I'm curious too, from because of some of what we talked about, right? The additional complexities that these temperatures propose and put in, as barriers maybe to certain technologies and things like that. Are there any technologies that you're looking at or you're interested in, but they're not quite viable yet for like a cold chain setting?
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I are wearing one of them, wearing one of those right now, our glasses, right? When you
Okay.
go into a freezer and you walk out of a freezer, what happens? Your
Yeah, you get
glasses
fogged
fog
up.
up,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
we were looking at Google Glass back in, I don't know, 2016 or so. It's been
Mm,
so long ago, but it wasn't a viable product because if the glasses fog up, you can't actually use them. And so
right.
wearable technology is something that we're absolutely looking at. The same thing is with gloves, right? These people have to wear gloves. Touching an iPad or touching a screen or a wrist device is really challenging, and making sure that you're hitting the right thing and
Mm,
that it's actually registering, right? So it influences our product design to some extent, right? Hey, we have to make sure that we design the product so it's very simple and what they're hitting doesn't get confused with something else, and then they have to go back a screen because that creates challenges and frustrations for our operators too. How do we have the right gloves to be able to do that? How do we have gloves that very basic, like you can maybe take
mm,
off the tip of it and touch it briefly and then put it back on. All those type of things are things that we're thinking about. And so improving the employee experience, making sure that they can get the information and activities captured in the system is really important. Voice is something that we've been looking at. And it's not new
mm.
technology per se to the
Yeah.
warehousing space, but ensuring that the voice units work, ensuring that the software behind it is compatible with what we're trying to the use cases that we're trying to solve is 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 not always that straightforward and that easy. And so these are all things that, hey, how do we limit the touches? How do we
Mm-hmm.
limit the errors? And how do we make it easier for employees to operate our systems and really inclement weather? And that's
Mm,
that's things that we're looking at. And the same is with our equipment. All of our gear needs to be freezer rated, right? If we install network access points, they need to be freezer rated. If we need to provide better Wi-Fi coverage or accessibility to systems or system uptime, all of that stuff that's in a freezer has to be freezer rated. So there's as you noted earlier, there's an additional level of
mm,
complexity across the board when we think about our technology. And for us, that's a blessing and a curse, right? A lot of people don't want to solve these problems for the cold chain space because they're more
mm,
intractable for them, and there's a lot more opportunity even in ambient space, but it also does make it harder for us to solve those things. And there's less solutions that you can garner and less access to different types of equipment that are then available and for the types of needs that we have them. That being
mm.
said, when we do solve it, guess what? It still works in an ambient warehouse as well. So it all
Yeah.
works together, and that's why we love solving these. They're hard problems, but we love solving them.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great point too for anybody that's listening that's trying to build a solution for the warehouse or anything like that. Is if you can solve it for freezing temperatures, well, it's also viable in an ambient setting too as well. Very interesting to hear there because there are these like little nuances kind of and things that maybe if you haven't worked in these settings, like you don't typically think about, like you said, like just something as simple as like, well, how do they touch a screen, right? Or how do they press a button? Like, is it a special glove to do that, or something like that? And I think it's really interesting to hear all of that, and really interesting to dive into all of this with you today, and kind of hear some of your perspectives on technology and how Lineage is approaching some of these things as well, and what goes into some of the complexities around the cold chain, and how technology helps to navigate that for your customers ultimately. So really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to me here, Eric. If people want to learn more about Lineage, or maybe they have some questions for you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, we have our website, www.onelineage.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm generally pretty responsive there too. That's how Kevin found me, right?
Yeah.
and yeah, I love talking about technology challenges. Everyone's got different types of challenges, and it's really fun and to listen to what other people are facing, and oftentimes it helps me find solutions for our organization as well. So sharing information is critical. I don't think that of this as a zero sum game. We're all
Mm,
trying to um, drive towards something that's bigger than ourselves here, right? And feeding people is more fundamental to our society than I think anything else, right? People call education a right and healthcare a right. Well,
mm,
malnourished people put a strain on our healthcare systems, and
wow.
undernourished kids don't learn so well. And so finding the being able to provide food to people is just a really exciting thing, and making sure that people have access to food and nourishing food is really core to what Lineage is. And any way that we can continue to do that better is something that a conversation that I'm always willing to have. So
Mm.
Kevin, I really appreciate the time today, and thanks for having me as a guest on your show.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love that, and I love your view on what you're doing there at Lineage, and I think it is so critical and important to be able to deliver that food. I mean, I know I appreciate eating, so I'm very appreciative of it. Definitely important to make sure that that food is staying viable and getting to where it needs to go, with reducing the amount of waste there as well. So really appreciate you coming on, and we will put all the information about Lineage at thenewwarehouse.com, as well as in the show notes here. So, Eric, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.